Hi, everybody. So, something that often gets forgotten is that the revolution didn't actually start out as a war for independence. It was a response to the British occupation, to the various taxation measures that the colonists opposed. But its goal for many was still a sort of changed relationship with the English Parliament, not actually constituting the colonies as a new independent nation. It was more than a year after the Battle of Lexington and Concord before the Declaration of Independence was finally signed. So, what changed in that time? One thing that historians often point to, and that we can definitely say had an influence, is a pamphlet, which you're all going to read, that was entitled Common Sense. It was written by a newcomer to America, a man named Thomas Paine. Paine is a fascinating man. He's one of those people who we could say is sort of born to cause trouble. And even though he's often regarded as the father of the American Revolution, his irresistible urge to publicize controversial opinions and attack his rivals led to him being so unpopular by the time of his death that only 6 people attended his funeral. The pamphlet he wrote was very much in that country party political tradition, like Cato's letters, but it took the logic of that tradition further than it had been before. Where Cato's letters essentially approved of the English Constitution, but just saw it as under threat from nefarious forces, Paine basically saw the Constitution as corrupt from the ground up because it still allowed for a monarch to have power, and it actually gave the monarch the power to overrule the decisions that were made by the Commons. So he saw it as just sort of a screen of legitimacy behind which what was fundamentally an absolute monarchy still ruled. This is how he put it. Though we've been wise enough to shut and lock the door against absolute monarchy, we at the same time have been foolish enough to put the crown in possession of the key. So this pamphlet was very popular. It represented a major shift from the idea that the struggle of the Patriots was to basically protect their rights as English people and to protect the English system from tyranny, to the idea that the whole system of constitutional monarchy was still fundamentally tyrannical, and that the only way for the colonists to truly safeguard their liberty was to separate entirely from a government that was ruled by that system, to separate entirely from England. So the actual pursuit of independence begins with a resolution passed by the Second Continental Congress on May 10th, 1776, that urges the colonists in all the colonies to overthrow their respective British governments, their respective colonial governments. This was followed in June by a vote of the Continental Congress in favor of a resolution that all the colonies were free and severed their ties to England. Finally, a committee of 5 members of the Continental Congress, John Adams of Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin of Philadelphia, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, and the lesser-known Robert Livingston of New York and Roger Sherman of Connecticut, met to draft a formal Declaration of Independence. This declaration was mainly the work of Thomas Jefferson. The document was ratified on July 4th, 1776, which we, of course, celebrate today as Independence Day. Now let's talk a little bit about this document, the Declaration, and what it can tell us about what was behind the final decision to declare independence. So when we talk about the Declaration of Independence, when we learn about it, we often think of the preamble. We think of the preamble as containing the sort of essence of this document. It's very inspiring. You've probably heard at least some of it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whoops. Filming in a new location here. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. You can see how connected that is to the philosophy of the Enlightenment, to the idea of natural rights. People are born free, and governments only exist at the with the permission of the people, and that they can revoke the permission if the government becomes tyrannical. But recently, historians have begun to take a lot of interest in other parts of the Declaration of Independence, particularly the grievances, which is the actual list of reasons for why independence is necessary. One historian who's taken a look at these grievances is this guy Robert G. Parkinson, and he argued that this culture of paranoia and prejudice, to an extent we've talked about with sort of earlier manifestations of colonial discontent, the idea of, the Catholic tyrants working conspiracies through their influence on Indians, for instance. He said that those kind of ideas, that cultural heritage, was actually highly influential in influencing the decision to become independent, and that is reflected in the grievances, particularly this grievance that comes at the end. Parkinson was very interested in. It says about the king, he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us. He's endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. The British did use Indian allies in the war, and that was outrageous to the colonists, for whom the idea that the British had betrayed them on behalf of Indians, as we've talked about, had kind of long been a trope, long been a resentment. And this idea of domestic insurrections is a reference to the British inciting rebellions among slaves. Lord Dunmore, the British governor of Virginia, had made a declaration in November of 1775 that any slaves who joined the British would be given their freedom. And the colonists saw this as basically an inducement by the British for slaves to rise up and kill their masters. Actually, there were as many as 100,000 slave desertions during the war. Some of the slaves who we would call loyalists, who joined the British, responded to this offer, would end up in Canada after the war, and some of them would even end up in what is now the country of Sierra Leone, which was founded as a refuge for emancipated American slaves. Its capital, in reflection of this, is known as Freetown to this day. This also seemed to the colonists, though, like a huge betrayal. It played into that long-standing idea that tyrants would work on, inferior groups to realize their conspiracies. Now, how important this was to provoking the Declaration, as opposed to the issues of taxation, as opposed to liberal philosophy, I don't know. It is debatable. But I think what is important to understand, and what we can definitely say, is that it was the experience of war itself that led to declaring independence. If the colonists didn't go into the war wanting independence, it became impossible to imagine persisting as subjects of England after the colonists actually had this experience of being at war with England, experiencing English troops attacking them, attempting to destroy and defeat them. That created a kind of enmity, a kind of hostility that couldn't easily be healed or forgotten. So it's the course of the war itself, it's the experience of being at war that turns a rebellion for political change into a rebellion for independence. And things like Lord Dunmore's proclamation or Indian attacks that were sponsored by the British are definitely part of that. We'll talk a little bit about the war itself. We can't go into great detail here. In May of 1775, the Continental Congress organized an army, an actual sort of the first kind of American army, a continental army, to replace the ad hoc militias that had been operating before then. And it was to be led by a general named George Washington, hero of the French and Indian War, arguably inciter of the French and Indian War, as we mentioned. I'll talk about one battle because it's a little near and dear to my heart, because I happen to have grown up basically in the town where it took place. It's the Battle of Saratoga, often called the turning point in the American Revolution. It was fought in this town in upstate New York in the fall of 1777. British troops led by John Burgoyne and American troops led by General Philip Schuyler, for whom the town where the actual battlefield is Schuylerville. It's old Saratoga. Saratoga Springs is now a separate town. You couldn't care less about that, and it doesn't matter. But British troops led by John Burgoyne and American troops led by General Philip Schuyler met in upstate New York in the fall of 1777. And the goal of the British campaign, the reason they were marching all these troops into upstate New York, was they wanted to basically take control of the Hudson River. And if they could control the Hudson River, that would cut off New England from communication with colonies to its south. Benedict Arnold is today remembered for the fact that late in the war he betrayed the colonists for the English, to the extent that Benedict Arnold is now like an insult that's used to describe someone who's a traitor. But at the Battle of Saratoga, he saved the day, and you could argue that he had a major role in saving the revolution as a whole, because he brought this column of reinforcements at the last minute that led to the forces of Philip Schuyler defeating the forces of John Burgoyne at the Battle of Saratoga. Why is this called the turning point in the American Revolution? It's the turning point in the Revolution partly because it was such a big victory that it both raised the morale of the colonists everywhere, but it also inspired people who were watching the course of this war abroad to think, oh, the colonists might actually win this. They look at how they routed this powerful British force at Saratoga. And this included, funnily enough, France. We know that France obviously had to say the least, a kind of troubled relationship with the colonists. But France is, first and foremost, the enemy of England. And now the colonists have basically declared themselves to be enemies of England also. So France is actually going to impressed by this victory at Saratoga, join the war. It's going to provide money, it's going to provide troops, and a lot of people would say that that was really critical. France's help was really critical to the colonists eventually winning this war. In 1783, the British signed the Treaty of Paris. This is a different Treaty of Paris than the one we talked about previously. They signed the Treaty of Paris, which formally acknowledges the new colonies' independence. So what happens now? One immediate consequence we can talk about is that this independence ended all of the kind of British restraint on the colonists in terms of relations with Indians, all the imperial protections that they had provided for Indians, such as that line of 1763 preventing settlers from crossing the Appalachian Mountains. All that's going to be gone. And so the American Revolution, this victory is not necessarily good news for American Indians. But aside from that, there are a lot of outstanding questions as to what this is really going to mean. What kind of government are these colonies going to actually have? What is the relationship of the colonies going to be to each other? And how are the colonists going to prevent the specter of tyranny from rising again? So we're going to talk about how those problems get resolved in the next video.